Great. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be here. I really enjoyed myself last time, and I can't believe it was June. We're almost in November, which is absolutely wild, but I'm honored to be here. For those of you who were here last time, you probably know I am very passionate talking about mental health and our overall wellness. So any opportunity that I get to do this, I so appreciate. And you guys are a great group. From the little I've encountered with you and your little chats with each other, I think it's absolutely amazing the connections you have. And hopefully this is a meaningful presentation. And at the end, we'll also have some Q&A, as Wayne has said. So the topic today is managing stress. And more specifically, I've titled the presentation, Managing COVID Toxic Stress. And a year and a half ago, I remember I started doing some presentations about the fear of COVID or pandemic grief or toxic stress related to COVID. And that was a year and a half ago, and didn't realize that all this time later, we'd still be talking about it and just how much there would be this cumulative effect of stress. And what is toxic stress? How do we deal with it? I will get into all of that. I'm going to share some slides. I'll be a little bit back and forth. You will have access to the slides after the presentation. And hopefully, just share some information that's really helpful and meaningful. As Wayne said, I've worked in mental health for 15 years. Most of that experience was at a community mental health agency. And to be honest with you, most of my training, most of my experience is talk therapy. I love working with people and talking about how they think, how they feel, and how they behave, and how all those things are connected. And I really believe we can change our life if we can change our thoughts. However, today, I'm not actually really going to focus on that. I'm going to focus more on our physiological, our body, and how that impacts our mental health, because stress is very physical. Even if I think positive, even if I've got great coping mechanisms, I can still experience a great deal of stress. And that's why I want to take that angle today. And I hope it's helpful. So I'm going to practice sharing my screen here. Hopefully it works. And from the beginning would be good. Okay, can you guys see a slide? Okay, great. So managing the toxic stress of COVID. So what is toxic stress? Well, stress is actually a gift. It is very helpful for us. When we're stressed, an alarm system goes off, an alarm bell goes off in our bodies, and it says there's a threat, there's something wrong. So we need to kick something into gear. We need to rise to the occasion. And our adrenal glands start pumping out some things, and our heart beats faster. It's a very physical process that happens, and it's a gift. So that if I had a dog chasing me, that stress would make me run away. Or if someone was attacking me, that stress would put me in the position to defend myself and fight back. That's the fight or flight response. The problem with toxic stress is that that alarm doesn't switch off. We have three types of stress. If you think of a traffic light that is green, yellow, and red, a green light would be positive stress, which, if I have to study for an exam, maybe that's positive stress. We all need positive, stressful things in our life. It's how we grow. It's how we're dynamic as human beings. But then we have tolerable stress, and that's when things get a little more rough in our life, but we have enough supports in place. We have enough coping skills. We can manage through the stress. It's tolerable. But when we don't get relief from stress, and when it's prolonged, and when we don't have enough resources to cope, then we're looking at toxic stress. And with a year and a half of a pandemic where we've not had a lot of control, there's been a lot of, sad stories, fearful stories, a lot of media, a lot of tensions, a lot of political unrest, fear about our health and welfare. That's a lot of stress over a prolonged period of time. And I don't know about you, but I've not been able to switch that off. Even if I cope well, it's still there. And so I actually believe most of us are experiencing some form of toxic stress. And whether or not it's related to COVID, I still think this is an important topic to talk about, because toxic stress, I believe, underlies a lot of physical and mental health issues. So we're going to do a little bit of an anatomy lesson. And I am not a doctor. I'm a social worker. So if anyone on the call is a medical professional and has an MD, please forgive me if I butcher our anatomy a little bit here, but bear with me. Oh. Okay. So this is a diagram explaining our nervous system. So we have a nervous system in our body. You might have heard of our central nervous system. That's part of it. And that's our brain and our spinal cord. And then we have a peripheral nervous system, which is nerves, cranial nerves that extend from our brain and our spinal cord to our body, and it sends messages. And that peripheral nervous system is broken into two parts. And it's our somatic and our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic is the one I want to talk about because it's broken into two parts. And those two parts are our parasympathetic nervous system and our sympathetic nervous system. And if you can't read all these little things, that's okay. I will go through it a little bit. The sympathetic nervous system is what I talked about a little earlier. It's our fight or flight response. So when there's a threat, our body says, we need to actually stop digesting our lunch right now because that's not important. What we need to do is send blood to this person's extremities so they could run or they could attack their attacker. We need to make their heart beat faster so they pump more blood. We need to make their lungs open up so they take in more oxygen. Their pupils need to be dilated so they could focus and have tunnel vision so they know where they could run. All of the blood that would have gone to internal organs like the stomach and the digestive system sort of stops, and it's redirected to muscles and tissues where people can be energized. If you've ever heard a story of, a mother who was able to lift a car because their child was in danger, that's the sympathetic nervous system in full force. We get superhuman strength. And that is what, when we have toxic stress, that's the system that's activated. In the short term, that's wonderful. To have that strength, to be able to fight, to be able to do what we need to do, that's very healthy. It's a safety mechanism in our bodies. But if that goes on for a long period of time, you can imagine the outfall of that. If for a long period of time, blood is not pumping to my stomach and my digestive tract properly, that might create an issue. If for a long period of time, I'm having problems with my pupil dilation and my heart is beating really fast, that could be, pretty fatiguing and hard to focus. And if you've ever had a panic attack, it can actually feel like you're dying. And that's when the sympathetic system is really engaged. And it's over engaged because people feel all those things happening in their bodies, but sometimes there's no threat. There's not a dog attacking them. There's not a person running after them. And because of that, it becomes overwhelming to their system. The parasympathetic nervous system on the other side is our peace response. It is the opposite of the fight or flight. So everything that the sympathetic nervous system is doing, the other one, the parasympathetic, the peace response, it's about rest and digest. So it's doing all the opposites. It slows your heart rate down. It constricts your blood vessels. It stimulates your stomach and your digestive system. It's focusing on eating the food and digesting it and releasing it. It contracts your bladder so that you could urinate if you needed to. It's the rest and digest. And we only do that when we're safe. So all that's fine and dandy if we go through life generally at rest, and once in a while we have a threat. Then we can live in the parasympathetic, we can live in our peace response, and once in a while our sympathetic needs to be activated because of a threat. And when that happens, that's balance, right? If I'll show you using something here, 1 second. The slinky, really helpful for this. So if the slinky is our nervous system, generally speaking, we want a little bit of activation once in a while, but fairly calm, fairly resting. When we're in fight or flight, you could just imagine what that looks like with our nervous system. But then the parasympathetic just brings us back down to a place of calm. And then we can just go through life tickety-boo. But with COVID, we have been more like this, pretty actively, pretty regularly. I might be thinking positive. I might be, happy that I've got my vaccination. I might be, okay that there's lockdowns and everybody's wearing masks, but you know what? It's been unpredictable. And I don't know if there's that Delta variant, and then there's more stuff on the news. And before you know it, your nervous system has not had any rest for 1.5 years. And that is a recipe for toxic stress. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Sorry for the back and forth, guys. One day I'll have an assistant to help do this with me. So some signs that you might be experiencing toxic stress. Again, if you can think of all the physiological things that have been happening in a prolonged period of time. Fatigue. If your heart is beating really fast for a really long time, it's like you've had a workout nonstop. That's tiring. Your adrenal glands that are pumping out the adrenaline, they're tired. Headaches, insomnia, not sleeping well. When we have too much adrenaline and cortisol in our body, we don't sleep. We have nightmares because of all the stress in our body. Gastrointestinal problems. In fact, many people are diagnosed with IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, when really what they have is an overactivated nervous system. And because it's overactivated, whether it's anxiety or PTSD or some other kind of stress or trauma-related disorder, their digestive system is literally just not getting the blood and the stimulation that it needs because the sympathetic nervous system is always overactivated. So when people tell me they have IBS, I always check for anxiety. Irritability is another symptom of toxic stress. A lot of people say to me, Ann-Marie, I'm just not myself lately. I am so irritable. I'm apathetic. I'm on edge. I'm angry. And they think they're a bad person. You know, I work with a lot of Christians, a lot of believers, and they're like, I'm a bad Christian and God must be disappointed in me because I have no patience. And I say to them, I don't think it's a character deficit. I think you're burnt out. I think you're having toxic stress. And that changes everything because then there's no shame and people can get better. A clenched jaw, you know, I don't know about you, but sometimes during the day, I kind of catch myself and I kind of unlock my jaw because when we're stressed, we clench our jaw. Difficulty concentrating, a hormonal imbalance. Other things that can show up in our body are inflammatory issues. So people who struggle with everything from arthritis, you know, if you already had arthritis, maybe now since the pandemic, maybe it's been more inflamed because toxic stress does that. Crohn's disease, colitis, heart disease, diabetes, even cancer, allergies, all these things could be traced back to toxic stress, either causing them or making them worse. So it's quite a serious thing. You know, mental health is so much more than just our thoughts. It's also our body and how that can affect our mental and emotional well-being. So I don't want to end there. I wanted to share that because I want to normalize what we've been going through, because I can't tell you how many people I've been working with who think there's something wrong with them because they don't feel like themselves. None of us really feel like ourselves because the world has just been so unpredictable for the last year and a half. And I did a video recently and I called it the optimist struggle with COVID, because it's the optimists and the positive people you actually have to watch out for. Because we cope well, we find the silver lining, we pull up our bootstraps, we reframe, and we find good out of the most negative things. You know, God will work all things for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. We have hope and we are positive, we're optimistic. And sometimes because of that, we actually don't notice when we're struggling, or we don't take that time to validate the journey and the difficulty and the trial. And that lament and that expression of that difficulty can actually alleviate the stress that we're carrying. So if you're struggling, I want to say that would be completely normal given this last year and a half. And that doesn't even include any life circumstances that you might personally have. You might have an ill loved one. Maybe you haven't seen loved ones. Maybe you've had a recent life transition of some kind. Even positive change can be very stressful. You know, getting married, finding a new job, buying a new house, all positive things, but are incredibly stressful because they're still change and they still create stress because our brains and our bodies are adapting to new information. And that can create change fatigue. It can create emotional exhaustion. So I want to normalize the stress. And then I want to point us towards some practical strategies so that you can manage it well, because we have it. We have to notice it, recognize it, but now what do we do with it? So I'd like to give you some really hands-on, really practical strategies that address the different areas of this stress, because this stress is physical, it's emotional, and so we need strategies that affect those areas as well. So back to my slides, and you will get a copy of these, so please don't worry about taking copious notes. And the video also, as Wayne has said, will be available later. So some practical strategies to heal your system, encourage your heart, and reduce your stress. So the first one is find your anchors. So in life, when life is unpredictable and there's a lot of things happening that we can't control, we need to find anchors in our life. And those are things that are predictable, reliable, safe, and familiar. Maybe an anchor for you is walking your dog at 8 a.m. every morning. Maybe it's having a coffee with your spouse at 5:30 every night. Maybe it's phoning a loved one once a week. And maybe it's a Bible study or some devotional time. Something in your life that is familiar and feels safe and that you can continue to do despite the change, despite the stress, that can ground us and can actually alleviate some stress. Because when the world is spinning, we need something that feels like home. We need something that feels familiar, and that is an anchor. Deep breathing is another practical strategy. And if you've heard any mental health talk ever, you've probably heard about deep breathing. And sometimes I think it has a minimized reputation because it feels so simple, like it's just deep breathing, right? But if we go back to our sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response that's being activated because of tremendous stress, what's happening when that happens? We are taking in way too much oxygen. If you've ever seen someone have a panic attack, they kind of go, and they take in a lot of air at once. And that's partly why they get lightheaded. That's partly why their pupils dilate. And it sends a message to their brain that they're not safe. When we do deep breathing, we slow that process down. We still take in a deep breath. We're still taking in a lot of oxygen, but we're pacing it. And we're coupling it with also holding our breath and then expelling our breath rather than just taking in too much. And what that does is it actually slows our heart rate. It actually slows down the sympathetic nervous system and it engages the parasympathetic nervous system. The best way to engage your peace response is to do deep breathing. So if you've ever heard it and it's been minimized, I want to put it back on the pedestal and say deep breathing is powerful, especially if you do it when you're not stressed. So if you're not in the middle of an anxiety attack, or if you're not in the middle of a heavy overload of stress, and you just practice deep breathing regularly in your life, maybe you do it in your morning when you have your coffee, or at night when you're watching TV for a little bit, what you're doing is you're working a muscle that's called your vagus nerve. And you're actually strengthening your peace response so that when you are stressed, when you are anxious, you can more quickly enter a resting state again. Just like with working out our muscles. If I go to the gym once and work out really hard, I'm not necessarily going to get stronger. But if I do it regularly and consistently, I'm going to build my muscle mass. Same applies to deep breathing. So there are different deep breathing strategies. This one I personally like. I hear a lot of feedback from the people I support that this is the one that they like. And it's inhale, count 4, hold, count 7, and then exhale, count 8. And it might take a bit of practice because we're not used to it. Another thing I encourage is when you do it, put your hand on your diaphragm and on your chest. And you want to make sure when you're doing the deep breathing that your belly is what goes out, not your chest. So when we're stressed or when we're tired, we tend to do chest breathing, which is very shallow. But if you've ever seen a baby lying down, their belly goes up and down when they breathe. We're all born as belly breathers, and we lose it as we get older and we get stressed and we have these sedentary lives and we sit at a chair all day all slouched over. At least that's me anyways. So breathing from our belly is how we were actually wired to breathe, and it's deep and it's meaningful and it's engaging our lungs fully. So deep belly breathing, inhale, count 4, hold, count 7, exhale, count 8. You can also do 4-4-4-4 breathing, where you breathe in, count 4, hold, count 4, breathe out, count 4, hold. So in 4, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. So 4-4-4-4. And I did like a box because that's what they picture a box when they do the 4-4-4. You could also it's also called box breathing, if you've ever heard of that. Exercise. This is another one that is really important. And I'm going to have some other strategies that are maybe a little more unique that you haven't heard of before, but I have to include these regular ones because they are just so powerful. So when we're stressed, our body is producing extra adrenaline and extra cortisol that we don't need. Adrenaline being an active hormone and cortisol being a stress hormone. And they're there so that we could fight and be stronger and focus if we needed to. But what we need to do to feel less stress is have an outlet for those things. We need to actually expel them from our body, especially if you've been stressed for a long time. You really need an outlet. And exercise is a great physical outlet to get rid of them. Exercise will get rid of cortisol, and exercise creates adrenaline. So it feels like it's counterproductive, but it also gets rid of the excess adrenaline from your body. And it also gets you deep breathing. So that is happening as well. It gets your blood circulating. It rejuvenates you. And if you think of a pond of water, when the water doesn't move, that pond gets very murky, very muddy, very yuck. We're 65% water, give or take, as human beings. And when we don't move, we get kind of murky, kind of yucky, kind of mucky, and that affects our mental health. So literally moving our bodies is a great mental health mechanism. And I say to people, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes a day. You are running laps around the person who's sitting on the couch if you can do 5 minutes a day. And I also say 5 minutes because it's feasible, it's manageable. And if you set the bar low, you're more likely to achieve it. And then if you do 20 minutes, wow, now you've got this sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. But if you set the bar at 20 minutes and only do 5, you might feel like you failed and you're unmotivated. So I like to set the bar low realistically. And then people often feel better because they do more than that. So even 5 minutes a day can help alleviate that extra cortisol. And if you're not sleeping at night, I definitely recommend at least 5 minutes of exercise, even later on in the day. So you get rid of that cortisol, you're more likely to have a better sleep. Eye softening. Now, this is one that if you attended the last workshop, you might have heard me talk about. This is another exercise that engages our vagus nerve. And our vagus nerve is part of that parasympathetic nervous system. It's part of our peace response. It is the longest cranial nerve in our body, and it's not talked about nearly enough. And I feel like in mental health, we've done a disservice because we do talk therapy with people that just have an overstimulated nervous system and really just need to do things like heal their vagus nerve. So eye softening is a great way to do that. So with eye softening, what you do is you look at a stationary object and you focus on it. So for me right now, I have a vase in front of me at my desk. So you just look at that object and then you start to blur your vision and you start to become aware of your peripheral vision. I hope I don't go cross-eyed while I do this, but you start to become aware of your peripheral vision and what's around you. So I'm still looking at the vase, but I'm aware, okay, I can kind of see my gray curtains on the right, and I can kind of see a blackboard on my left, and I'm just aware of it. And your vision is blurring and you're opening up the field of vision. And the reason why this is a strategy that works is because when we are in the fight or flight response, we go into tunnel vision. Our pupils dilate and we focus. Because again, if I was being attacked, I would need to run and I would need to find the path of least resistance. I would need to be able to navigate the woods really well. So I need that tunnel vision. But if I open up my field of vision, I'm literally sending to my brain the message, okay, you're safe. Because there's no way I would have open vision like that if I was unsafe. So you're rewiring your brain, you're exercising your vagus nerve. And I bet you, if you took your pulse when you did this somehow, you would notice it would go down because you're actually lowering your heart rate variability, which is a great way to build that peace response. When our heart rate goes from 0 to 60 really fast, or from 60 to 120 to be more accurate, that means we're more anxious or our nervous system is more easily stimulated. But if it takes more work to make it variable, then that shows that we've actually been working our vagus nerve, we've been healing our parasympathetic nervous system, and we have a lower heart rate variability. And the eye softening and the deep breathing are two strategies to do that, to lower your heart rate variability and keep it calm, sending the message to your brain that you're safe, all is well. And if anyone struggles with hypertension or tachycardia, like these strategies can also help with that. They're very helpful for our mental health and our physical health. I'm going back to my slides here. And when there's questions at the end, if you've got questions about any of those things, I can go over them. But if you just Google eye softening vagus nerve, you'll see people doing it as well. So the next one I have on our list of strategies is have some go-to grounding strategies, because a way to de-stress is to ground ourselves. And so I've put a number of them on here, and you could just pick one or two that you like. I recommend everybody has a little menu of options of things that work well for them. And what works well for one person might not work well for the next person, and that's okay. And this way you can pick what you like and what works well for you. And then when you have them ready to go, you're more likely to be able to use them in a time of need. So one is to use your senses. We can really easily ground ourselves in the present by focusing on our senses, because our senses are what connect us to the present. Taste, touch, smell, feeling, all these, our five senses are ways that we can connect with the present. So the first one is called 333. And 333 is 3 things you can see, 3 things you can touch, and then move 3 parts of your body. I like that one. I find it easier to remember because it's just 333. So you would name 3 things you can see, and then you would name 3 things you can feel. I can feel the desk in front of me is cold and smooth. My wrist is warm and soft. And the slinky is kind of hard and round and smooth, and it's light. So, and then move 3 parts of my body. Maybe I move my wrists, wiggle my toes, and maybe move my neck. And because you kind of have to think about it, again, it can calm you down. It can help you refocus. Another one you've probably heard of, and I'll send you guys a handout for it, is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can taste, 1 thing you can smell. So it goes all through your senses. And if you can't smell anything in that moment, then you think of a smell that you like. If you can't taste anything in that moment, then you think of a taste that you like. Maybe you like mints and ginger tea. And so you would just think of that and name it. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 or 3, 3, 3 are 2 grounding strategies using the senses. Another one is to count backwards from 100 using 7. So again, if you're feeling intense stress and you want to ground yourself, just try to count backwards from 100 using 7. It's not easy to do, and that's why it works, because it gets you thinking and it gets you sort of out of that stressful moment, and it calms your nervous system back down. Keep a grounding object on your keychain. So I got a picture of a keychain on my slide here, but some people like to use a rock. I know people that use a piece of Lego and they carry it with them. You know, I use pens. I tend to like to fidget with pens, but it's also a grounding object for me. I don't know, I like to fiddle with them and play with them. So some kind of grounding object can be really helpful, and keep it on your keychain so you always have it with you. Another one is you can put your hands in warm or cold water and just focus on the temperature. Just think about it. Wow, okay, this water is warm. What does that feel like? How does that make me feel? Is it soothing? Is it comforting? What does the wetness feel like? That's a mindfulness activity. Another one is to savor a food or drink. So maybe have a mint. And what does that mint feel like in your mouth? What does it taste like? What sensations do you feel on your tongue? Again, we're grounding ourselves with a mindfulness activity using our senses. And then another one, which is a thinking grounding exercise, is thinking categories. Think about basketball teams and name as many as you can. My husband could do that no problem. I would not be able to do that. Yeah, think of animals and maybe name animal categories that you like. Think of restaurants that you like to go to, what's on the menu. Just listing in categories, again, gets you out of your fight or flight response, bringing you back to the present, back into a peace response. Another strategy, because again, this is physiological, a lot of it, is avoid a cortisol diet and watch your caffeine. So what is a cortisol diet? Well, essentially, stress, because it makes us release cortisol, and cortisol makes us crave salt, fat, and sugar. We tend to eat kind of unwell when we're stressed. And everyone's been talking about their COVID-20 they've put on, or COVID-15. We used to call it the freshman 15 in university, but now it's the COVID-15. And a lot of that is because people are stressed. And so they're going to the comfort foods. And it's not that we're lazy. It's not that we don't want to eat healthy. Our body feels like it needs that because of all the energy we're exerting in terms of our nervous system and our fight or flight response, and our heart beating faster, and our liver producing extra glucose. Like there's just a lot of things that are happening. And so because of that, we need to be careful what we eat and not feed into that craving, because ultimately sugar and too much salt feed into the overall cortisol diet and actually perpetuate a vicious cycle. Then we crave more, and then we feel more stressed, and we feel more lethargic. Caffeine, please don't hate me for this. I love coffee. I love tea. I'm English. I was raised on tea. And I also love my coffee. But too much of it, too consistently, it does two problematic things for stress. First of all, caffeine looks a lot like the adenosine receptor in our central nervous system. And adenosine sends a message to our brain that we're tired and it's time to go to bed. And so that's why when we have caffeine, we feel more alert, because partly anyways, it's because it's binding to that receptor. So that message doesn't go to our brain that we're tired, and then we feel more alert. Short term, that's great. If I need to go to work and I'm tired, a coffee does the job. But over time, continuous blocking of that adenosine makes us more tired because our brain is not getting the rest that it actually needs. You go to sleep at night, your brain's not actually entering the REM state of sleep. The other thing with caffeine is it makes our adrenal glands produce more adrenaline. What does that sound like? Oh yeah, that sounds like the fight or flight response. So it's feeding into the same cycle. So the key here is just moderation. I just encourage moderation and to be aware. If you struggle with anxiety or a lot of stress generally, caffeine is something to maybe consider less of. I worked with someone once who had incredible anxiety, and I was about to do counseling with him, which I would have been happy to do, but I asked him about his diet. And when he told me that he drinks about 4 Red Bulls a day and only eats McDonald's, I said, you know what, we need to work on that diet first, because that is why you're having panic attacks. And he changed his diet and he was fine. Mental health isn't always about our brain. Sometimes about what we're putting in our stomach. Sometimes it's about what our body is experiencing in the world. So stimulate your vagus nerve. And this I've already kind of talked about, but I'm going to give you some more strategies to stimulate it. So again, the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in our body. It is, I think, the 10th cranial nerve. I just stopped the screen share. Maybe I'll go back to it. It's the 10th cranial nerve. It connects our brain to many of our important organs. If you can see my diagram, it's connecting to our lungs and to our stomach and to our spleen and to our liver. And it plays a key role in our rest and digest functions. It sends a message of digest your lunch. It sends a message of, okay, we're going to excrete that meal now. And that's good and healthy. That tells our body we're safe if we're doing all those things. And you can work out this nerve like a muscle, increasing what's called vagal tone and decreasing the heart rate variability that I talked about. And I've already talked about the eye softening. That affects your vagus nerve in a good way. And deep breathing. And I'm going to give you some more strategies. And they're really, really simple. So the deep belly breaths we've talked about. Another one is cold exposure. So if you think of somebody who, has hypothermia, what happens? Their heart rate goes down. So cold exposure lowers our heart rate variability. It stimulates our vagus nerve. So if someone's anxious or really stressed, one of the best things they can do, have a cold shower. Or put an ice pack on their chest or on the back of their neck. The back of the neck is actually quite good because it's actually close to the vagus nerve. And so having a cold pack can be a really simple, practical strategy to reduce stress. Who would have thunk it? All these years of cognitive behavioral therapy, and a cold pack could possibly help. It might not be the full answer, but gosh, it's in the right direction. And singing, humming, and gargling. It's interesting, as a Christian, I love to worship, I love to sing, and it does help me de-stress. And I believe that because of my faith, but who knew it was actually a physiological strategy, engaging my vagus nerve, engaging my peace response. So when you're worshiping and you're singing to the Prince of Peace, but you're also engaging your peace inside your body. Humming, same thing, and gargling. So gargling water. One therapist says every time they have a drink of anything, they gargle it for a second because they know this is actually stimulating their vagus nerve because it goes down the back of our throat. So when you gargle, you're actually stimulating it. You're giving it a little jostle, a little workout, and it revitalizes it. Who would have thought it? Meditation and prayer also stimulates our vagus nerve. And there's lots of research on this. It also helps our brain. When we pray or meditate and they take like an MRI or a brain scan, they can actually see different regions of the brain lighting up, and ones that were anxious, they go dimmer. So it literally engages better regions of our brain to get us out of stress and into peace when we meditate and when we pray. And then laughing. And one of my favorite scriptures is laughter does the heart good like medicine. Well, it actually does. When we laugh, we're engaging our vagus nerve, and we're also doing some deep belly breathing. So it's just all around a healthy thing. And finally, I want to talk about another strategy that is also very meaningful. And it's one that, coupled with therapy, can be so powerful, and it's self-compassion. So there's been a lot of research recently that cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, you name the therapy. There's a lot of them that are evidence-based, a lot of them proven to work. I use them for myself and for other people. They really work. But the research shows that they work best if they're coupled with self-compassion exercises, because we heal when we feel loved. Is that not powerful? I don't know. I think that's very powerful. When we feel compassion towards ourselves and to others, we are more likely to heal. And most mental health issues are actually rooted in shame. So when people have a root of shame in their life from trauma, from how they were raised, from an accident, from a mistake they made, or something they think they did wrong, whatever it might be, if there's a root of shame in their life, that often underlies anxiety, depression, sometimes PTSD, sometimes psychosis. And shame, the antidote to shame is compassion. So whenever I'm working with someone, one of the key areas we focus on is that self-compassion. Like, do you love yourself? Do you like yourself? Some people don't even tolerate themselves. And so in this environment where there's a lot of stress and a lot of heaviness, it's an opportunity to take care of ourselves and to show ourselves a little bit of compassion. And that, my friends, will be very powerful. And so how do you do that? What does that look like? One is to validate your needs and address them. Just if you have a need, it's valid. I feel lonely, I need some company, or I feel like I need some more boundaries. I feel like I'm being taken advantage of, or maybe I'm tired and I need some breaks. Those are all valid needs. And if you validate your own needs, that's going to be a self-compassion exercise towards yourself. Take care of your body. Exercise, like we've talked about, eating right. That's a way to show kindness to yourself, not being so hard on yourself. Remove negative comparisons and limit media exposure. A lot of this is sort of looking at the world, looking at Instagram and looking at the perfect world that so many people have. And looking at that too much sends sort of a negative message to us. But if we remove those comparisons, or if we're able to look at them and not personalize them, that's a way that we can show ourselves a little more kindness. Not watching too much bad news, maybe focusing on some more hopeful and helpful things. Build positive affirmations is another way that we can show ourselves kindness. Positive affirmations are things like just saying kind things over yourself, like I am worthy of love, and there's a plan and a purpose for my life. I'm here for a reason. I deserve to be happy. Like something so simple. So many people don't think they deserve that. They don't think they're worthy of that, but that's compassion. And it might feel foreign. I don't know all of your stories. And I know some people's stories make it very hard for them to say things like that. It feels weird. It feels icky. It feels wrong. And if that's you, what I would encourage is practice and sit with that feeling for a little bit of discomfort and try being kind to yourself, even starting really small. Because over time, we build new neural pathways in our brain and we start sending ourselves these healthier messages. Receive a compliment is another one. If anyone ever gives you a compliment, say thank you. Just receive it. That's a little bit of self-compassion. And again, I can just imagine some of you saying in your heads, I can't do that. That's so awkward. It takes practice, but it can be very healthy, because shame doesn't have a place when we're kind to ourselves, when we receive love from others and from ourselves. And then the last piece, because I've given you some strategies, is now we need an action plan. Have you ever heard of SMART goals? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive. I won't spend a lot of time on this because I know our time is coming short. But the idea is this information is only helpful if we use it. And so let's set some specific goals that are actually achievable so that we're more likely to do it. Like maybe the exercise for 5 minutes every day, or even every other day. That's the measurable part, like 5 minutes of exercise. It's specific, it's measurable, it's realistic, and it's time sensitive. I'll start next week, whether it's having more fun, whether it's doing the deep breathing or doing meditation and prayer, whatever it might be, setting realistic, attainable, measurable goals means you're more likely to do them. When people have a New Year's resolution, they have great intentions, but often they fall flat because they didn't follow a SMART goal. They didn't follow something that was achievable or specific enough. And over time, it just gets kind of forgotten. So I encourage you, if anything that I presented is helpful, even pick one thing and then implement an action plan so that you can see some positive results in your life, because it has been a difficult season and you all deserve to have some stress alleviated from your plates. And I know we're going to enter a Q&A in just a second, but I'll just close with just encouraging, if this was helpful at all, I'd love to stay in touch. MindJoy is very much about making mental health knowledge practical and accessible, because I want to see people well and living out the potential of their mental health. So I've got YouTube videos that talk about some of the things we talked about today, and I've got a little screenshot of my Instagram page. Every day I try and post a tool or a tip or a technique so that people can have resources, because I think mental health is, something that we all can improve and we all deserve to have. So thank you. I hope this is helpful. And I think Wayne might come back on to moderate some questions, but thank you so much for coming, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Ann-Marie. I'm going to open it up for some questions. I'm going to stop the recording and the spotlight. Just give me one moment.